my name is Stonesy Boy, and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Today we are reading pages... Well, we're on the final chapter of Happs today. 121 to 138, if I am not mistaken. I can't see my screen because I'm doing other things. You know, making a machine work and all. Anyways, we are on the last part, and we get to learn if Jace and Aiden get out of this to-be existence, or if they die with a smile. So yeah, without further ado, let's begin. Jace stiffened. His eyes were huge. Aiden figured his eyes were just as big. His heart had started racing. Out with me, Happs repeated. Sometime since they'd last seen him, Happs had lost more than a vertebral functioning. They were lost had been only a gravelly growl preceded the word out, but out sounded even more alarming than it had before. The command wasn't so outspoken, and Happs' now contorted voice was now barked like it was shouted at an irate dictator. It's one with the means of execute its subjects. Aiden managed to get his legs working. Kneeling, he scrambled to the climbing pipe opening. Then Jace didn't move. He continued to stare the direction of Happs' Aiden. Aiden nudged him with the toe of his boot. Come on! Jace blinked and got to his knees. He crawled into the climbing pipe behind Aiden. Aiden reached for the first handhold. As fast as he could, he pulled himself up and found a foothold. Then he reached for the next handhold, for the next and the next. He crawled up the wall like a spider fleeing a ravenous bird. He didn't turn to look, but it sounded like Jace was right behind him. As he hoped, the climbing tube ended up at the opening fork leading to two level pipes. As Aiden stopped to evaluate his choices, his shoulders tightened. Happs' instant rapt reflection seemed to bounce back and forth in the climbing pipe behind them. Aiden risked a look at Happs, repeated his intent. Out, with me. The words echoed through the climbing pipe and seemed to radiate outward into the other tubes. As soon as Aiden checked on Happs, he was sorry he had. Although Happs hadn't been able to manage the ladder pipe, he was having better luck with the climbing pipe. His knife-like hands were slashing at the pipe walls, as his mutilated tread still looked for enough functionality to find a purchase on the land and in footholds. Happy's progress was thankfully slow, but it was still progress. He was scaling the climbing tube. Come on, Aiden had led Jason to the left pipe. They scurried along the pipe as fast as they could. When they rounded the first bend, they realized they'd chosen the wrong pipe. It was blocked with a two-way mirror security barrier. Turn around, Aiden shouted Jace. As soon as they saw the barrier, turn around. Jace turned around and he saw panting in terror. Aiden understood why. Had Happs made it to the top of the climbing pipe? If he had, they'd be crawling right into the sharp metal hands, and he used the Happs' hands. But that choice did they have? Faster, urged Jace. They were nearly shoving Jace down the pipe. Aiden's long legs gave him more speed than Jace's short ones, and Jace was slow and clearly reluctant to face what might be waiting at the end of the pipe. Aiden shoved Jace out of the way and squeezed past him. He feared he had a better chance of facing off against Happs than Jace did. Seconds after Aiden took the lead, they reached the junction again. At the same exact moment, the spear-like tips of Happs' arms scorched the gash in the junction's floor. The ripping sound made Happs' whirring and clanking even more hideous. Aiden felt like they were in the bowels of a churning machinery designed to disassemble and pulverize whatever was put into it. As Happs' now serrated extender arm flailed toward Aiden, he flattened himself in the bottom of the pipe. His gaze darted around. Behind Happs, a security meter was sliding over the top of the climbing pipe. There was just no longer an option. They couldn't go back the way they just came from. It went nowhere, and Happs was blocking the only other pipe entrance. Aiden looked up at Happs' gleaming metal arms. He froze and the arms started reaching for him. Suddenly, Jace let out a banshee yell. Lunging over top of Aiden, Jace dove under Happs' outstretched arms, his Swiss Army knife in his fist. Jace jammed the blade into the open doorway of Happs' torso. Jace's attack on Happs galvanized Aiden. He knew Jace's little knife wasn't going to do much damage to Happs' circuits, but he remembered that little robot didn't weigh that much. Maybe they could drive him back, if they could avoid getting slashed. Jace pulled his knife back and barely avoided getting stabbed when Happs jerked toward him. Aiden quickly flipped to his side and spun. He scissor-kicked Happs, shoving the robot against the junction's walls. Realizing that Aiden was trying to do, Jace lay flat and added his kicks to the attack. Between the two of them, they managed to shove Happs into the dead-end pipe, and they were able to knock him over. When Happs landed on his side, Aiden got to his knees. Maybe we could finish him off, Aiden thought. They should attack instead of fleeing. If they could get the plastic shell off its head, they might be able to rip out the circuitry. He fleetly asked himself why he had mastered juggling, hula hooping, jump roping, and yo-yoing. What good did those talents do him now? It wasn't like he could pull a juggling pin out of his back pocket and whack Happs in the face with it.
Jace must have had the same attack idea as Aiden had. He too shifted to his knees. His mouth was set and his jaw bunched. He was ready for battle. Together the two boys advanced on the thrashing robot. They didn't get far. Happs might have been on his side, but his arms hadn't stopped moving. He waved them continuously, which effectively turned them into robotic propeller. Shining, sharp metal sliced through the air and turbulent sweeps were impossible to completely avoid. One of Happs' swipes caught Aiden on the cheek. Hot pain seared his skin and warm blood ran down his jaw. He jerked his head back. "Go, Aiden," Jake shouted. He pointed at the other pipe opening. "We need to get away while we can." As Jake spoke, Happs suddenly whirred wildly and flipped onto his treads. "Go," Jace urged again. Aiden didn't argue. He turned around and crawled pell-mell into the other available pipe opening. Checking over his shoulder, Aiden saw that Jace was right behind him, and Happs was right behind Jace. The robot had wasted no time reorienting himself. "Out with me," he chanted as he rolled erratically after them. The pipe was unfortunately a level pipe. Although Jaden and Jace were racing through it as fast as they could, Happs had no trouble keeping up. The sounds of the humming motor and crunching treads chased the boys down the pipe. Aiden's mouth went dry as the thought of how close Happs dragged Metal's limbs had been getting to Jace's feet. The image of the metal piercing Jake's sneakers and his skin gave Aiden the strength to call even faster. The pipe took a sharp left turn and then it switched back immediately to the right. After a abrupt right, it jogged left again. At the end of the left jog, the pipe opened to the platform. It was at the top of the slide. Aiden lunged onto the platform. At the same time, he reached back and grabbed Jace by the shirt. He yanked Jace into his arms just as Happs lurched toward them, his deadly blade-like appendages sweeping the air, only a few inches away from them. "Hold on to me," Aiden shouted. He pushed off the platform with every bit of strength he had. The slide they found was a good one. It had a couple turns, but mostly it was steep and straight. In this matter of seconds, it shot them into a ball pit, similar to the one they landed a couple hours earlier. Aiden could only hope a few seconds it taken to get into the pit had been enough. He had a sinking feeling that it hadn't been. But he didn't have time to think about his dread. As soon as they hit the plastic orbs, both Aiden and Jace started beating the balls aside, lunging their way through the colorful spherical sea. Aiden had his eye on a pipe opening in the other side of the pit. Unfortunately, though, they didn't reach it before Happs reached them. As Aiden's foreboding had predicted, Happs didn't come down the slide just as fast, probably even faster, and Aiden and Jace had. And when he had come off the slide, maybe just because it was more compact, Happs had been launched further out of the pit than the boys had been. Happs also had no trouble plowing his way through the plastic balls. His mouth shoved the balls aside like they were nothing. This is why Happs got them before Aiden and Jace could get to the ball pit, and because Aiden was in the lead, Happs got to Jace first. "Out with me," Happs crackled as he reached out to grab his quarry. Jace must have sensed that Happs was right behind him because he immediately dove into the ball pit as if it was a lake and he could swim under its surface to get away. It would have been a decent plan, maybe if his feet hadn't popped up when he dove down. Happs' limbs were extended in efforts to grab Jace. When Jace's feet rose up into the ball pit, Happs immediately tried to clutch his feet. But of course, his hands couldn't clutch. They could only slice. The razor-like spikes at the end of Happs' arms cut right through one of Jace's ankles, hacking off Jace's right foot roughly and crudely. And with not much force, that foot was torn free of Jace's ankle and spit aside by a chainsaw. The second foot landed among the plastic balls like a plop. Jace's underbody erupted from the ball pit. Jace's mouth was open wide with a shriek that was so loud and so high-pitched, Aiden wouldn't be surprised if it had cracked the nearby mirrored partitions. Aiden immediately leaped for Jace, grabbing at his friend's arm. He wasn't thinking, he had no plan, he was just reacting. The problem was that Happs was doing the same thing, and it was faster than Aiden. When Jace's chest appeared under the heaving ball pit, Happs grabbed for Jace again. The robot's now bloody knife hand slashed through Jace's shoulder, and Jace's shrieks ratcheted even higher. Aiden managed to hang on Jace's forearm, pouring all of his might. Aiden hit Jace from the pit. As soon as Jace was out of the pit, Aiden hooked his arms under Jace's armpits. When he levered himself into the nearest pipe, he didn't know it was too late to save his friend, but he had to try. In a few seconds, as Jace's foot was amputated, he must have lost a massive amount of blood. Aiden had to get Jace away from Happs, or he was going to be too late. "Out with me," Happs persisted. Aiden yanked Jace further into the pipe. Jace continued to scream in pain. His eyes were bulging impossibly wide, and his mouth was stretched into a grimace. "Hang on, Jace," Aiden shouted. He threw himself backward along the pipe, hauling Jace with him. But again, he wasn't fast enough. Happs moved too quickly, and as he moved, he kept trying to get a hold of Jace. The shrill sound of metal and metal filled Aiden's ears, and Happs brought both the limbs together on Jace's lower body. Aiden was sure Happs was trying to pick up Jace, but of course the torn metal couldn't do that. All he could do was slice and shred. Aiden couldn't see what Happs was doing to Jace, but he could hear his brawling cries, and you could see Jace's face was so misshapen and by pain that it was almost unrecognizable. Aiden tried to hold his friend's gaze, willing him to stay alive. Behind Jace, the robot reached out again. "With me," Happs repeated, and Aiden pushed off the floor of the pipe with all his strength. Clutching his friend, he heaved himself backward, trying to snatch Jace out of Happs' range, but he couldn't do it. Happs thrashed forward and Jace howled. As he did, blood poured from his mouth. Jace's eyes blinked once. Aiden felt Jace's body stiffen in his arms. Then he felt Jace go limp. Jace's eyes stared as nothing. Aiden froze in disbelief and shock, held onto Jace's body. He looked in the gaze at Happs. "Out with me," Happs said. Aiden had no choice, but he had to let go of Jace and crawled like a demon down the pipe. The next several seconds were nothing more than a confusion of sound and sensation for Aiden. He couldn't make sense of anything he was experiencing. He was just vaguely aware of the crawling for his life, but the thought of dim perception was outweighed by all the other information assaulting his overloaded brain. As if cascading down him all at once, he felt tears spilling down his cheek, bile filling his throat, snot dripping from his nose, sweat trickling down his back, blood pounding through his veins, and pain flashing in his knees. Woven through all that, overwhelming grief made him howl like an enraged wolf underneath these primitive reactions. His mind could only offer one repeated thought: this can't be happening, this can't be happening, this can't be happening. Aiden's peripheral senses were working enough for them to be aware when Happs got close. He heard the metallic shredding sounds, and he registered his relentless whirring and endless chant of "out with me." Putting on as much speed as he could, Aiden shot through the pipe and found himself in another junction. Three of the pipe openings in the junction were partitioned off. He had just one option, thankfully. It was a ladder pipe. Just as Happs emerged from the pipe behind Aiden scrambled to the ladder rungs. Happs was so close that Aiden felt Happs' sharp metal edges graze the leather on the sole of Aiden's left boot. He finally whipped his leg up and whimpering as he did. He couldn't contain the whimper. The image of Jace's disconnected foot filled Aiden with a total-minded, numbing hysteria. Aiden was devastated by the death of his friend, of course, but the idea of getting dismembered for some reason was 100 times more horrifying than simply dying. He didn't want to go out the way Jace had. No way. The ladder pipe was a short one. Aiden didn't think it took him up a full level, maybe a half level. The ladder pipe came to an end of a fork between two pipes. Again, however, one of the paths was blocked. Once more, Aiden had just one choice. Glancing around, sure Happs was stopping the bottom of the ladder, Aiden started to duck into the opening pipe. He hesitated when he saw Happs was looking up at him. Happs was a round white head tipped back, and had one functioning eye, was gazing at Aiden intensely. The intent Aiden thought looked decidedly evil, but of course it was crazy. He had told Jace Happs wasn't capable of evil. He was just a robot with the job to do, and he was doing his job the best he could. He didn't care for the results of his efforts with carving up innocent kids, did he? Aiden shook his head, but he didn't tear his gaze from Happs. As Aiden watched, Happs tipped his head back into the usual position and powered backward away from the ladder. Happs turned and slipped into the ball pit, his butchered treads belching plastic balls up around him. Happs mowed right over the top of James' limp, lacerated body and disappeared from Aiden's view. "He's going to find a way to get me," Aiden said. As soon as he spoke, Aiden realized no one was here to get him. Jace was gone. Didn't Aiden get that? He was watching his murdering robot run over on top of his dead friend. Aiden was alone. He was talking to himself. Aiden had no idea where he was going. He crawled through the pipe. He and Jace looked a way out and found one. What would Aiden do? He didn't know, but he knew he was going to sit still and wait for Happs to come and shred him. He put his head down and crawled. Aiden wasn't sure how long he'd crawl before he reached the fork. That was no longer a fork. One of the pipe openings in front of Aiden was blocked. The other was gradual slide in the curved out right side. Aiden looked back at the other shoulder. Should he retrace his steps and make his way back to the ball pit? If Happs was looking for him, Happs was no longer in the pit. It made the robot wouldn't have reason and capacity to return to the place Aiden had fled. There was only one problem with the idea. Aiden wanted to return to the ball pit. Jason was in a ball pit, and Jason's blood was in the ball pit. No, Aiden couldn't face going back to the ball pit. That left him with just one choice. He eased himself feet first into the gradual slide. Because it didn't know where Happs was, for all Aiden knew, the robot might have been waiting for the bottom of the slide. Aiden was in no hurry to get to the bottom of the pipe, so he let himself slip slowly downward, trying to ignore his way of imagination conjured up an image of Happs waiting at the bottom. The pipe Aiden was in was like many others in the section of the maze. Was walled up by two-way mirrors. Aiden could see through it easily, but he knew no one could see him. The slide passed by the back of the laser tag arena, and Aiden watched a couple boys creep around like fake boulder and ambush a couple girls with their goggles on. The teens weren't reasonably recognizable, but Aiden was pretty sure they'd been one in science class. They weren't friends, but he knew them. If only they managed to make more friends. Maybe he and Jace wouldn't have been their own universe guys, like Landon, wouldn't have picked on them. And if you guys like Landon had left him alone, Aiden would have gotten a black eye. If he hadn't gotten a black eye, maybe he wouldn't have wanted to escape into the maze. Maybe his whole life would have been different. Maybe Jace would still have a life. Aiden reached the bottom of the gradual slide, and he immediately cursed his vivid imagination, and it turned Aiden's fears into reality. Happs was coming along the pipe toward the ball pit at the bottom of the slide. He was just 20 feet from the pit. Swallowing a scream of terror, Aiden scrambled through the balls and crawled into the closest pipe. He clambered as fast as he could through the tube, trying to put as much distance as he could between himself and the pursuing robot. Happs' word sounds echoed behind Aiden. Its chant reverberated through Aiden's chest. "Out with me," Happs insisted. Aiden shook his left turn and found himself climbing pipe, nearly leaping up its sides. He reached for a handhold and he pulled himself upward. Below him, Happs clattered closer. Risking the downward glance, Aiden nearly lost his grip on the pipe when he saw Happs' one working eye look up at him. Happs began to ascend the pipe like a demented spider. Aiden climbed faster. At the top of the climbing wall, Aiden faced a junction of 3 pipes. He didn't stop and think about which way to go. He just crawled down the closest pipe, the one to the right. The scraping sounds behind Aiden told him that Happs wasn't far behind. Aiden's knees were screaming at him as he pounded through the pipe and getting harder and harder to move. Quickly, he felt his skin over his kneecaps was raw. He was having trouble breathing, too. Concentrating on the fleeing Happs, Aiden hadn't noticed how, until now, his tears had been cascading down his cheeks since Jason died. How his nose was plugged up from all the crying. He was gasping for air through his mouth. He could hear himself mewing and panting. And worse, he could hear Happs. The robot continued his chant. "Out with me." The chant was way too close. But the chant wasn't the worst of the sounds trailing after Aiden. The truly appalling sounds were the nails on the blackboard rasp of jagged metal edges, gouging the sides of the pipes behind Aiden. He could all too clearly imagine how he'd feel if Happs reached him. He almost knew the end of the pipe was in. Aiden spotted the sloping pipe. Although he was tempted to use it, he was pretty sure Happs could easily catch up to him on the slide. So he kept going, and he discovered this pipe ended up looping back around to the one he'd just been in. Almost, just as before it reached the juncture of 2 pipes, he realized the pipe was now closed off. Obviously, Happs had damaged it enough to activate another safety barrier. Aiden glanced over his shoulder and yelped. Happs was only 15 feet away. "Out with me," Happs said. The blood-stained metal out of his killer guards reached for Aiden. Aiden had no choice now. He was nearly cornered. He quickly backtracked a couple feet and dove headfirst into the sliding pipe. The second Aiden landed on the ball pit at the base of the slide, he didn't make the same mistake Jason made. Aiden didn't try to swim through the pit. Instead, he immediately found the footing, turned to face the slide he'd just come down. When he turned barely in time, Happs came catapulting off the end of the slide, but second Aiden faced it. Because Aiden could see Happs' trajectory, though, he was able to fling himself out of the robot's path. When Happs hit the ball pit, he landed on his head. Aiden knew the robot would right himself quickly, but it would take a few seconds. Aiden used every one of his seconds to his advantage, coiling into a tight spring. Aiden launched himself across the ball pit, reaching for the end of the nearest open pipe. He was in the pipe, and crawling for all his worth, he heard Happs' whirring heads thump into the pipe behind him. Aiden was no longer aware of his body. He realized he couldn't feel his knees anymore. He could hear his breathing as if it was his consciousness that transcended his physicality. He was no longer a boy crawling through the maze. He was a single-minded goal. Get away from Happs. Aiden crawled behind the bend and let himself, for an instant, feel the relief of having Happs out of his sight. But then he looked away ahead, and he was dismayed to see more safety barriers have gone up. He was at this junction, but he was only had one choice. 2 of the pipes were closed off. Aiden crawled into one available pipe. As soon as Aiden entered the pipe, he recognized it. He and Jason had been in this pipe twice, and Aiden knew the loop was only a couple of offshoots. He knew he had to get to one of the offshoots before Happs got too close. Taking a quick glance over his shoulder, Aiden realized that his goal was easier set than accomplished. Happs was the closest he had ever been. He was less than 10 feet away. Aiden put his afterburners. He crawled faster than he ever crawled in his life. He crawled so fast by the time he approached the first offshoot, he managed to get about 20 feet ahead of the relentless robot. He charged off toward the offshoot, and his first hope he'd find since Jason died. If Aiden remembered right, the offshoot led to the ladder. Happs can manage ladders. If Aiden could reach the ladder, he could. Aiden came to an abrupt stop. He reached the first offshoot. It was closed off. His safety portion barred the way. "No," Aiden whispered. "Out with me," Happs said. It was once again way too close. Aiden started to crawl once more. The other offshoot was just around the curve up ahead. He didn't lead to the ladder, but it did lead to a long tunnel that had a lot of intersecting pipes. Reaching the offshoot would be at least give Aiden some options. If Happs had been a living, breathing creature, Aiden was sure he'd be able to feel Happs' breath behind him. As it was, Aiden kept expecting to feel Happs' jagged metal appendages slice through his foot at any moment. For some reason, Aiden was back in his body again. The muscles in his legs were knotted, and his feet felt weird, as if they were crawling up the dread of Happs' savage limbs. Aiden tried to ignore everything he felt. He knew that if he thought about what would happen if Happs reached him, he would have to have the strength to keep crawling, and he knew that he'd reach the others offshoot. Yeah, just as body sensation would return, Aiden's auditory systems came back online too. He would once again hear his breathing breath. He would also hear rhythmic thudding of his knees against the plastic. And of course, he could hear Happs' clicks and whirs and grinds and resolute chant getting closer and closer. Just a few more seconds, Aiden thought. The offshoot was right around the corner, but it wasn't. Then Aiden sped towards the expected the offshoot to be. His heart plummeted into his gut. The offshoot wasn't open anymore. Like the other one, it was now covered by a safety barrier. Aiden was trapped, and Happs was getting closer. Out with me, Happs ordered him. The robot's crackly voice was way too loud, which meant it was way too close. Aiden didn't look back to see how close Happs was. He didn't want to know. Given no other choice, Aiden tore past the blocked offshoot. It was instinct to keep going, but Aiden knew his flight from Happs was futile now. As offshoots blocked, Aiden now caught in a closed loop. All he could do was go around in a circle. Crab's relentless pursuit had been activating security barriers all along. Aiden had been essentially herded like an animal into a killing zone. He was nowhere to go, but still, he kept crawling. As Aiden crawled, he didn't allow himself to think anymore, as if he thought he'd have to ask himself the questions he didn't want to ask. How long could they stay ahead of Happs? How long could they stay Happs out of the controlled passage through the looped pipe? Would damage it enough to partition it off even more? How long would it be before Aiden died the same way Jace had? As Aiden crawled through the pipe, he couldn't help but see kids beyond the pipe's plastic walls, and realized he'd gotten his wish. He was invisible. Wow. Well, that was sad. I'm starting to really think this book is like better than the originals, honestly, because these are more spooky books. But yeah, that's it for today. Tomorrow we are reading pages. Let me go over here and look at this real quick. 142 to 160, so it's another easy episode. 142 to 160, and after the next episode, we have 3 more episodes and then we're done. So, yeah, that's good. We'll be done soon. Anyways, hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be like, be efficient. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!